Thank you for joining me for another Quick Hits conversation. Today, I would like to talk about the negatives that come from having been an athlete and coming into the corporate space. To go with my competitive beach volleyball experience, I have three other athletes who will be introducing themselves as they speak. Marie, I'd like you to go first, please.
Hi, well, my sport was swimming growing up. I did a lot of competitive swimming and got to the national level. And then I went into triathlons in my adulthood for fun, and I'm a keen cyclist. I think this is a really interesting question to explore because we all focus on the pros of being an athlete and all the things that brings to the workplace and life lessons that we learn through that. So it was quite a struggle thinking about the cons of it. And I came up with a few things, but I think one of them was, you know, as an athlete, you can push yourself very hard. We're very driven and motivated, which is a good thing. But like with all good things, they can be taken a bit too far and be taken a bit extreme. So I think there can be the danger with that sort of personality type, of high achiever, doing everything, of burnout and exhaustion, and pushing yourself too hard. So I think that's sort of there's a number of cons I thought of, but for me, that was the first thing that really came to mind. You can just be a bit too driven and it can be a bit too much.
I'm Kristin, and my space was equestrian sports, and I did that through college and for several years after college. And I think one of the downsides that I've noticed, and I've noticed with my clients, is that the rewards in the sports field are very different than the rewards in the corporate field. Although performance is rewarded, it's not rewarded in the same way. So when you move into the corporate field, there's so many career tricks and social issues that you need to learn how to deal with that you don't have to deal with in the sports environment because the reward is the conclusion, and that you're not actually taught, especially if you're in sports in college. They don't spend an awful lot of time with people who are focusing on a sport in college, teaching them career goals and how to form career goals. So that leaves you at a great disadvantage.
Yeah, my name's Jim, and I concur with Kristin. I fenced intercollegiately throughout college and then regionally a few years after that. Loved the sport, but it did not necessarily prepare me for the real world. I think it can generate positive qualities in terms of perseverance and grit and, you know, consistency. But my grades suffered, you know, I can tell you that because I was focused on that. And as Kristin mentioned, that the rewards don't carry on over to other parts of your life. It was important to me, but it was not important to a lot of other people. And you know, that's particularly true once you start getting into some of these niche sports.
Yeah. The other thing that I noticed for me coming out of the sporting space was that as an athlete, you are allowed to push your teammates a lot harder than you are allowed to push your professional colleagues. Like you can really get on your teammates as an athlete, and it's perfectly acceptable. But in this professional space, you can't do that, not even close to that level.
Yeah, so the peer pressure can go through the roof on that. And that could be toxic in a corporate environment afterwards.
Absolutely. The politics of a workplace is so very different. You are not forgiven the kind of mistakes of a successful athlete. But the fact is, there are people inside the corporate environment that are working for different goals than sometimes their stated goal. And you have to be able to understand that and play with that in order not to get crushed by it. And when you come from an environment where we're all rowing in the same direction, and then you walk into an environment where that's not necessarily the case, even if they say it is, it takes a lot of adjusting and sometimes a lot of falling down.
Yeah, I agree. I think another thing that I think it's interesting to think about coming from that athletic background and in the workplace is that competition. You know, competition is obviously a good thing, but in the workplace, that can be quite a negative thing as well. You know, and I think it's interesting to think about competition with yourself internally and competition externally with others. And it can be quite a constraint to be that competitive because that doesn't work. I think you have to be working together. And if you're pitting yourself constantly against your peers or your team, that's not really very helpful. I don't think that's the right attitude to have necessarily. So I think, yeah, that can be a bit of a negative as well. I don't know what you think of that, guys, but.
I do, and I think that might be the difference between team sports and individual sports too. How you approach that competition and how you looked at what your victories look like. And never mind the reward, back to the rewards. No matter what, at the end of the day, if the team and the individual succeeded, you are the goddess of the day. When you all succeed at work, there will be a few pointed individuals who get credit. You might not, and that can be really hard to handle.
And I think you hit the nail on the head there as well about whether you do an individual sport or a team sport, and you might do both. Like as a swimmer, I did both. Sure. Maybe individual, but you're also swimming medleys and teams. But I think that's quite an important one because that does bring a different mentality.
Yeah. Do you develop a little bit more of an us versus them mentality?
I was just going to say that, Jim. I was just going to say that I think that being an athlete makes you very tight around your team. Whether you're an individual athlete or a team athlete, you still have a team. And so you get really tight around your team and everyone else is other. Everybody else is someone else. And in the workspace, it shouldn't be that siloed. You should be able to work with other people. So I was just going to make that point that I feel like as an athlete, you can get a really us versus them mentality.
I wonder as well, there's something around, that mindset of it, as an athlete, you only see yourself, and then bringing that into the workplace is only seeing yourself worthy if you're achieving or winning. And I think there can be that, you can define your worth in that way, which can be quite unhealthy.
Well, there can also be a big letdown after your big event or after your finals or whatever, where you're not quite sure what to do with yourself afterwards, and your identity can be tied up with your work or with your sport too much, and you don't value yourself outside of that.
I've seen that transition be really hard for a lot of athletes. They've always been identified as an athlete and a really high quality athlete, and then all of a sudden they aren't an athlete and they don't know who they are anymore.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge. So we've talked about a lot of different things. How might someone who is now in the workspace, having been an athlete, catch some of this stuff without making the stumbling mistakes that we had to do to notice these problems?
Well, it's self-awareness, isn't it? But how do you get that self-awareness? I guess it's just lessons and as you go along, being knocked down and where you struggle and learning from that. That's what you need, a coach.
Well, another coach is what you're referring to.
Different kind of coach.
I do think that there are career development programs out there that are valuable and viable, and I think a lot of universities are now starting to use them with athletes and apply the skills that they haven't in the past been giving them. So I think it's a matter of understanding if you understood that you had a physical something that you had to make up for in your sport, then understand that there's just a learning curve you have to make up for when you're going into this new activity. And so being open to that kind of communication and being open to that kind of learning curve will help prevent you from getting discouraged and will certainly help you adapt better. I wish I had been more self-aware and accessed myself some of those tools when I was moving my career into a different direction.
Yeah, I do wish that I had worked with a mentor and or a coach early on who had an athletic background. I think even if they hadn't realized it, they would have had so much to share with me about that transition. So I guess what I'm saying is if you have the opportunity, find a coach or a mentor who has made that transition from being an athlete to being successful in the corporate space and start asking questions.
Yeah.
And I think there's one thing that's important, and it is a statistic, and I can't tell you where I got it from because I can't remember, but they kept lauding all the advantages of athletes in the corporate world. And they said like 42% are this and 38% of this. And every time they lauded their successes, that was always under 50%. So I'm thinking, so what about the other side of that? They don't talk about it enough. But if you realize that more than 50% of athletes have real struggles, then you know that you need to address that so that you're not one of that percentage. Because the advantages you bring can be great as long as you recognize how to use them.
Well, thank you so much. That is our 10 minutes. I appreciate you exploring this with me. It's been very interesting and very eye-opening for me personally. So thank you so much. We'll have another conversation very soon.